Esta conferencia comenzará a grabarse.
Can I share my screen?
Yes. Perfect. Now the floor is yours, Celine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, do you see my screen?
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. So I am geographer. I am professor at the University of Lausanne. I am specialized in research on urban systems. And so I will give you some insight about resilience of urban systems. So I hope that it will not be too much theoretical, but I will give you many empirical results as well of my research. And so maybe you will be able to have some ideas of also how networks develop in the world. And most of my research are at the scale of the world. So the resilience in a multi-level network perspective starts from long time, and it met more recent development of the Habitat-Free Urban Agenda started in 2012 about the resilience concept. And they made many meetings, about 360 meetings with many stakeholders, so more than about 500 stakeholders. And they met to define and to conceptualize and to also to define operational actions to develop the agenda of resilience at the city level. So it is interesting. We made that with a student of mine, and the linkages between the different stakeholders and institutions mean that they propose the same kind of concept and definition of resilience. So you see that there are, of course, international institutions, but also national governments and also foundations like Rockefeller, Bill Gates, and other NGO foundations. So it is interesting to see how they defined resilience. They defined it in 4 different dimensions: organizational, spatial, physical, functional, and addressing different hazards: natural, technological, economic, social, and political. So they created a kind of grid which in time is supposed to be more and more global. And they are developing now different application for a set of cities. The problem is that most of their ideas and most of their indicators are very local. And so what about global indicators and more global vision of the system of cities that they developed? So now I will give you my vision of what could be the resilience at the city and system of city level. So maybe we can also, when I will speak about cities, and we can discuss later on that, we can translate and transpose in a way the city as a cluster. Because, well, how I define city? I define city as many networks that are interconnected. So they cross, they overlap, they intertwine. And so you have different networks, layers, but different actors are in different networks, and information pass through one network to another one. And so it creates some concentration of cities like that, and relation inside cities that are maximized, but also relation between cities. So we have relation inside city A, for example, and city B, and relation between city A and B that are not symmetric. And so how define city in this context? We can define city as a density of network, a diversity of networks, and the capacity of network emergence. And the urban system can be the channel network, diversity of resources, and a capacity to network emergence between these densities. And so this could be also a cluster or a different cluster of a city or different clusters in the world. I will give you an example. Here is the network of Volkswagen, a worldwide network with their different subsidiaries. So nodes are all subsidiaries of Volkswagen, and linkages are the ownership between one company and another one who owns another one, who owns another one, and so on. So here we have the headquarters of Volkswagen, and we have different branches, so Porsche, Ducati, and different specialized branches. And we have so a kind of tree, but not exactly a tree, and they are all situated here. I put the name of the of the city where they are located, and we see that the many names come several times. So in different parts of the network, you have the city hosts different subsidiaries, and also sometimes we have Munich, for example, here, or Salzburg. They are linked. So we have intra-urban linkages, so linkages with two companies inside the same city or between two cities. So now I will put here the same subsidiaries in one city only. And so here the cities appear only once, and we have here the vision of relation between cities, so Wolfsburg, Amsterdam, Paris, different networks of cities, Braunschweig, which is between Paris and Wolfsburg. And if we zoom, you see the networks inside the city. So the same network of Volkswagen create a network between cities and inside cities. And so it is important to see that it is really the same micro network that create these two networks. If we enter into Wolfsburg here, we have the network of the companies between inside, Wolfsburg. So it helped me to introduce you my framework. We have the micro adjacent networks. So all the networks that could be social, economic, partnership, collaboration, and so on. And we can define groups of actors that are more connected, what I can call the city or the cluster, let's say, and relation between the cities and the cluster. What is important is the bottom-up and top-down relation between all these things. The network is always the same, but the processes are different if they are micro, meso, with a collective processes, and macro with a relation between these meso processes. I will, in this presentation, I will introduce you some processes here between the micro and the meso. In second part, between the macro and the meso here. And finally, I will introduce you the PANARCHY, which is the resilience of the system of city, which combine all the three levels. So before starting, I will introduce you my database. My database is composed by different networks. Networks, as we saw for Volkswagen, the ownership enterprises networks. Networks of patents, scientific collaboration, air passengers. I've got some socio-economic indicators, and also what is very important to combine all this data at the geographical level, I defined, and it is a very big issue, the cities in a comparative way at the world scale. It is very, very difficult and very high issue. And so I defined what I call LUR, large urban region, which are composed by functional urban area, which are composed by morphological urban areas and municipalities all over the world. So let me begin by the micro-meso. At the micro-meso, I show you an example I developed for the Aix-Marseille-Provence metropole. The issue was to build this metropole, and we worked on different clusters of the metropole that were defined at the national level, but also with different regions. And so we took it is, for example, the Optitech cluster. We took the main companies participating in this cluster, and so they are here with the ownership linkages like Volkswagen we saw before, and we have this for companies, and we search what are their co-patenting. So the triangles, the red triangles, are the co-patenting. So the co-patenting of these companies, they are all around the companies, and the co-patenting of the co-patenters. And so we see that it creates a very cohesive community. This is a very first result. And the second result, we indicated in green all the actors that are in the metropole Aix-Marseille-Provence. So they are spread in all the network, but they are also inside this co-patenting network. And if we zoom, we see the different actors in Aix-Marseille-Provence, and they are so they are not collaborating always directly together, but many times they are collaborating with people, with the same people. And so it was interesting to put them together in the same room, and we made a workshop with all these actors with the metropole in order to make them speak about their different collaborations. So it was an interesting thing. What is very important is that in average, all these patenting networks at the worldwide average, it represents in intra-urban, so very close distance, geographic distance, it represents 35% of all the co-patenting. So most of the co-patenting are made by neighbors, people in the same regions or cities. And it is the same for ownership linkages. At the worldwide average, from 2010 to 2019, that we have the data, you see that more than 35%, 40% are inside large urban regions, so very close. And so London is very high, for example, for this criteria. 50% of all the linkages of London were in 2010 inside London, meaning that when we saw the crisis in 2008, the cascading effect between companies was very high. And so it decreased quite a lot, but not so much. It is still higher than the average. So, of course, there is a link between the local creation and the product of the global. And that global itself, as Doreen Massey say, is produced in local places. Now the macro-meso level. Here are, from 2010 to 2019, the whole network of cities of the world. Of course, you cannot see here all the names, but you have here the colors of the continent. So in blue, you have European cities, North American cities in red. Here are Russia and Ukraine, and in orange, Asian cities. So the main development of the during the period was, of course, the Asian cities that you see creating a whole system. When I made different clustering, what is important is to see what are the main cohesion of cities. So cities exchanging more together. We have three main nodes: North America, Northern and Western Europe, and even in 2010, UK and Commonwealth were already very apart, very isolated. And we have Ukraine, Russia. Germany was a little bit isolated than Europe at that time with Eastern Europe, and Iberia and South America, which is very interesting, are very close each other. What is interesting is that we made that for separating different activities layer: high-tech, low-tech, knowledge-intensive services, and less knowledge-intensive services. And what we found as a result of the evolution of all this clustering of the four layers, it is that more the time advanced, more the time progressed, less there is similarity between the different cities, communities in the different layers. So the different networks are diverging. It is interesting because beside, we made some experience with physicists about cascading models on these networks. And what we found that interdependent similar networks are more robust to random failure than randomly interdependent ones, meaning that as the networks are diverging, as we saw just before, then each network is less and less robust, so more and more vulnerable. And so it is important to understand that these networks are more and more vulnerable. Besides, there are many interactions between these layers and, of course, between cities. And cities co-evolve together, and they so with their trajectory here for US cities, and it is especially important for inside each country where also connections are more important. You have to know also that more than 2/3, more than 66% of all multinational firms network are intranational, and 80% intracontinental. So the cities are very interdependent. They collaborate. There is many selection and collaboration inside countries, and the trajectories are very similar, but with some change that, for example, Denver, Dallas, which are a little bit different than the others, you see. And what is important is to see how each city develop according to the average. And we have to introduce the economic cycle, as economic cycles diffuse in interurban, at the interurban level. We have new innovation start concentrated, then they diffuse in common places, and they diffuse in green places, mature, letting the place to new innovation in red. And we can measure that with what we call scaling laws, which is the diffusion phenomena according to the size, giving some very high slopes for innovative activities, lower slopes for commonplace, and lower even for mature. For example, here we have at the European level for functional urban areas, the total investment in a European project FP6 with a beta very high, and cultural places for the same cities with a beta much lower. So here it is much more innovative and concentrated in higher cities than here. So we can order and qualify the different stage of activities according to this beta, which is actually now there is a huge literature on that for science. So what I made is that to complete the three levels, firms and city network, we have to add another, let's say, dimension of firms' technologies, because the proximity between technologies are very important. And so here we have the same firms, but with different distance. Here we have geographic distance, here we have economic distance, making some clusters, but more on the economic dimension, and here relation between the different big activities. We represent this, their dimension, this proximity between activities with different techniques by, for example, the co-practice or co-location of different activities. Here for Chinese cities, I worked for 4 years on 3 different projects on Chinese cities, and so we have different proximities, of course, of the different activities, and we can see for different cities here that Tong, which is specialized in mining, or Zhuhai, specialized in computers, and Hangzhou, which is the headquarters of Alibaba. It is always the same space, but with different activities that are more or less important, and we can calculate some indexes of relatedness for cities. And these indexes, if we created a city eigenvector centrality, which is an index taking into account this relatedness and the city relations, is linked with unemployment growth and with growth of GDP per capita, what we could consider as a proxy for resilience. So I finish by introducing you the PANARCHY and resilience of city systems. So with these 2 dimensions, I introduce firms and cities in a geographical perspective, and proximities of technologies with distances of activities. We can imagine, for example, that there is a need for a demand for innovation in an activity or a group of activity, and so it goes to the different firms or institutions, and they can create some collaboration which could be at the local level. It can create some new specialization, coming back to the extension of some activities, changing the new global chain, and changing the new city networks. So this is how we can imagine the combination of the 2 dimensional level. And it led me to introduce you the PANARCHY approach. The PANARCHY approach, it is a hierarchical structure in which systems are interlinked in never-ending adaptive cycles. So we have a cycle here, we have a new cycle with reorganization, then there is an exploitation, then a conservation and a release. So you see here connectedness and potential here, and this cycle is integrated inside a multi-level system with large cycle, which is the mainstream, main change, which are supposed to be larger and lower, but they have influence on this cycle, and lower system that could also develop. So many small systems that appear, disappear, and so on, and then that can have influence also on this system. And this system so will react depending on the stage of its development. And so each city has got its own stage of development of, let's say, adaptive cycle. And if the adaptive cycle is blocked, for example, it cannot adapt to a new cycle, it cannot adapt to a change at the macro level, it cannot adapt to a revolt at the micro level. So this approach is important to develop both for cities and economy at the same time. I can give you just 2 examples of research we are developing. we are developing a research. So we operationalized the model for Russian cities during the economic crisis 2014-16 with the embargo, boycott, and fall of oil price. So we study with my assistant, Mikhail Rogov, the macro level of multinational firms and the economic trajectories of cities. And we watch at the synchronicity of macro and meso level, how different cities reacted in this boycott and crisis. And also we see how according to socioeconomic trajectories of cities, different actors reacted, how they adapted, and they could adapt for that, and how policies specifically helped to adapt. And so we see how here there is also a synchronicity. A second kind of approach we develop with another of my assistants, Mehdi Bida, is to develop a model with integrating micro and meso properties in order to create some different kind of macro level city systems. So finally, when we will put and think about the change of the European system of cities and clusters, we introduce Green Deal, digitalization, for example, and resilience. We can change directly and make action to the region, but also there are different actions from technologies, from people, employees, from firms, maybe taking here different paths with these different levels. So I give you different ideas and I am ready to discuss with you. I made different books. If you're interested, these two books, I can give you the PDF. I am preparing a new book. Thank you for your attention.
Wonderful, Celine. And I see that we could speak months or years probably of this enormous source of information and knowledge. Thank you very much. I have a lot of questions, but I will let the rest of the attendants make comment questions. Who is the first? If not, I will have first. You were speaking about the unemployment and GDP as possible proxies for resilience. How do you measure the resilience?
It is very difficult. And now, actually, in this moment, many studies, I saw many new papers about the resilience, and they all use different different indicators. So sometimes they use simply the growth of population, because many cities are shrinking, for example, in Europe, especially in small cities or in also in Central Europe, they are shrinking. So the growth of population with a, let's say, not the share of reproduction is very low in Europe. It is very important, and so it's a kind of attractiveness, and so they more or less use that. It is very difficult, and of course there are well, there is what we would like to use as a, well, as a proxy, as indicator, and also, as I showed you, there is a level. We could also imagine a resilience indicator at the level of the network itself, at the level of individuals, because when we speak about resilience in general, and when we spoke about resilience at the cluster, in the cluster context, we think about the maintaining of each firm, right, and the maintaining of employment. So the maintenance of the firm, the development of the firm. Or if we speak at the regional level, we can think that, well, if a firm has a disruption, there is another one which can appear. So then employment is very important. In general, it compensates the thing. So the level and the scale is very important where you want to measure with resilience. And sometimes it is good to have the failure of many firms in order to make possible to appear new firms and new activities. You know, it is this adaptive cycle. This adaptive cycle, if some element in the previous system is too strong and cannot let the adaptation or a new system appear, it is what we saw in the 70s, 80s, in the mining cities, when the people, they revolt and they contested because the mining closed. Actually, it is good to let the mining close and to develop other things, but it's not so easy, of course.
The moment, not easy at all. Yeah.
No.
Antonio, can I make a question to Celine? A very good question. Celine, one of the reasons for the networks being very positive is the quality of the communication and of the cooperation of the actors of the networks. How do you see from your experience and from your study the best way to measure and to maintain this communication, this cooperation, so that we have resilience in the systems and in our networks?
Yes, it's a very important point that you underline. If I come back here, when we showed this image to the actors, so we had all the CEO of the different companies and some representatives of the schools and so on here in the room, and they had no ideas of what would be the landscape actually of this activity. So excuse me. So I think that we are really in a very bounded rational, what we call bounded rationality, because people, they do not have a vision of all their neighbors. They know some neighbors and they think that they know everything, but when we explore a little bit more, we see that actually we have only a part of the information. We don't know everything. So the question is how to build a very adapted information for every kind of company. I think helping them to have a better view on the environment where they want to progress. And actually, it is the role of most of the service, helping to services, helping to manage the company, and so all these services, they create this kind of information of competition and what could be the different opportunities they can have. But the overview is very difficult and it changed very quickly. So I think that it is important to create information, very updated information, and very importantly to adapt and to create things very close to what could be possible. But also I would say that there is information. The information is always a little bit delayed, of course. And what would be important is to measure more the potential of emergence and the potential of new linkage, new communications. And so in my point of view, the artificial intelligence can help for that. we made some essay with somebody in Tarragona, Marta Sales. She's physicist, and she worked on my networks. And so I think that it's important to work with them in order to also to make some scenario of if something can develop, what could be the potential of diffusion, development, spillovers, and so on. And as I saw, there are many diffusion between different dimensions. And so when we make, for example, some policies or we invest in some parts, it creates a diffusion in other parts. So these diffusion are already present, but many of these diffusion are also very potential. So this is important also to try to forecast.
That's
Can I make one question, please?
Go on, please.
My question is about indicators, local indicators and global indicators. We know that if we choose local indicators, we have more context. We have more the context of the cities. If we have global indicators, we can compare the cities, but what is the compromise between these two type of indicators? Because we want to compare the cities with global indicators, but at the same time we don't want to lose the context, local context. But if we use the local indicators, we can compare the cities because not all the cities have the same local indicators. How we address this issue?
Well, in my point of view, and I am a lot working on that, one of my obsession is this relation between local and global. I am now writing a paper on that. When you see, for example, that London is so high in was so high in the local linkages, it means a very local context, you know, and so of course here it is a very specific kind of networks, but we can make that on all the networks you want, and I think that yes, this kind of network perspective give a lot of information on what is the local context. So if you have networks that you can compare all over the world or in the country or in Europe, you can compare the different contexts and you can go deep, because actually the information is individual. You have individual information. You can see why this person was with this person, what is the political context, what is the history of that, and so on. So you can go deep in the local, and you can go high in the global as well. So I think that the network is this compromise between local context and global trends, exactly, because you can, with the same kind of information, but you can go deeper and wider in the contextualization. You can really contextualize much more this network, and the network permit to go, and this was my actually the grid I proposed here. Excuse me. It was to make really from the actors, and you can go deep in the actors and really go, and it is what I made in Marseille, for example. In Marseille, with the responsible of the metropole, we met the actors, we met the people, and we made interviews with them, and we tried to see how things could be improved at the scale of the metropole with the different actors, and how they are linked outside, and create also these linkages. So I think that this the network permits to make this compromise between local and global.
Yeah, thank you for your answer. It's I completely agree with you. But this raises another question that if we have a lot of indicators in different levels, more global and more specific, contextualized, how we can manage a big number of indicators and have these indicators always updated. How to manage these?
Actually, the network, so as I show you, the network is the same. Huh? It is always the same network here, here, here. So you can choose, and actually, I think that, well, many people say, and I agree with that scales are evolving. So the evolution of these scales, of this cohesion, must evolve with time. And so if we have some, let's say, automatic automatic tools creating these indicators at different scales, and this is what I have when I, excuse me, I will come back to here. Yeah, here I have different scales. For example, I will tell you, when I work for Marseille, I worked more at the functional urban area level in France and in Europe to compare Marseille to them. So I was a little bit smaller than the large urban region that I use at the world scale. And I think that well, with the same data, I create different scale of data actually, and I use them when I need. And so if we have tools for creating this data according to micro data, you have to update, of course, the micro data, but it is important to see that you can create whatever scale you want. And of course, I think that, as I told you before, the resilience issue, you have to have to be very clear on your idea of in which level you want to search your resilience and what you want to create. So the indicators will follow, which will be at the scale you want, you know. So for example, here my database is totally integrated, and I can produce whatever information I want at different scales, actually. So I can come back to municipalities as well. And this is what
yeah, I think one important technology to have more resilience, we have the data for the indicators, and with that data we can use artificial intelligence to simulate different scenarios and to see what is the best scenario for each for each challenge, for instance. So I think in your model, if you put artificial intelligence, you can improve a lot this concept.
I totally agree, and this is in this direction that I try to go. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Lucia,
yeah,
the question?
Yes, please.
Yes, bringing it down to the cluster networks, so from the cities networks to the cluster networks, and making a bridge somehow. We know that a lot of cluster organizations have their own CRM, customer relationship management databases, where they collect a lot of information. And at the same time, throughout Europe, we see that quite only a few clusters really go into network analysis because it's difficult to make, it's costly, it takes time, and often it is made just once to understand the network in a moment of time, but then it is hardly repeated after, I don't know, 3 years, 4 years, 10 years to understand how the network evolved. The question is, do you see the possibility of integrating or further developing such databases that cluster organizations already have into looking more towards network analysis or enriching them with different indicators or things they should look at on how to capture these movements within the network? Is there anything you could recommend or suggest or see the possibility of either using individually or interconnecting such databases?
Different answers. The first one is that the collaborative platform of Europe with ULA and Marek, they try to develop this kind of tools, and especially specifically with GRC centers in Sevilla, they develop a kind of, so for example, they develop patents network, but you can visit the website and you can see in different technologies, and they develop so they have also a visualization network of value chain that are not at the enterprise level, but it is at the level of activities, and so it is an average of international trade, I think. But so we try to develop some projects to produce some tools that could be used by everybody. And so this is a very big project we could do with the platform and with a cluster alliance. And the second part of the answer is the skills. We must develop the skills of the people. So what we must develop, and so we just made a project with Antonio, but it was not accepted as a Marie Curie project. But I think the idea is important. We have to develop managers of clusters that know more or less these tools, but they are not specialists. And we must develop computer scientists, physicists, data scientists who are very specialized in this, in their domain of data management and analysis and artificial intelligence and so on, but they know very well the cluster issues and the cluster problematics. And so the integration of all these skills are very important. So we must develop more skills that have, let's say, a principal skill in one domain and an overview on the other skills to collaborate very well with the other ones. In the project we developed, we were 5 different disciplines, at least 5 different disciplines, very far from computer science, visualization, physics, cluster, geography, economy, and so on. So it is very interdisciplinary approach we must develop. And this is very important, that the people, they would have the skills. And what we wanted to do also with Antonio was to develop, and we could develop it without a project, let's say, to develop workshops, maybe when we will be able to meet, we can develop that better, but we can do them also online for in a way. To develop also training for that. So I think that we must develop at the same time some tools and training, because if we develop a tool, the tool must be very adapted to the cluster managers, and so the cluster managers must participate to the creation of the tool itself. And this was also one of the, I think, important points of our project, was the we were we were supposed to have meetings very regularly, but also to have a community of cluster managers working on the tools to critique it and to help to develop it in the way they want it would be helpful for them.
And policymakers from
and
the region.
Policymakers, yes.
That was very important perspective also. We will continue working on that, Celine. I am sure that we will have success. We need to look for new opportunities for funding this project because it's quite important.
Antonio? Okay, go ahead, please.
Good morning. May I make a quick question? Thank you very much for the presentation. This is a very interesting topic. My question is about the dynamics of this process, especially given the situation that we are living now. And what are your forecasts about the future? For instance, you use the relationship between the local and the global dimension are very much likely to be affected by the big changes that in the current context. And I also have one suggestion. You analyze the air passenger flows, which, as you know, have been immensely disrupted. Another variable that indeed can help us in understanding this relation between the local and global dimension is about telecommunication flows, for instance. I wonder if you have used that variable, because I think that can, especially now that you know, air passenger flows have been heavily disrupted, can help us in understanding the relation between the two. And of course, when we think about resilience of cities, have we not been over dependent on the global dimension, which anyway was slightly in retreat? I don't say that's a good thing before the current crisis.
Yes, you're right. Telecommunication is important, but what is so there is the weight of telecommunication, the mass of telecommunication, but the nature of telecommunication is very important. For example, in this kind of network of ownership, it is also quite difficult to catch the nature of the linkages. We have the percentage of ownership, for example, and ownership, we know that it is important. This is why I continued for years to use this ownership, because I think it is very important for the strategy of firms to have the ownership. It is very an important aspect of the company, and in a way we know that with the ownership there is a lot of collaboration as well. We cannot measure it, but it is important. For communication, it is even higher. We don't know what would be for and like for air passengers, for example, we have difficulties to know what is a part of tourism, what is a part of travels for work, or travel for family and communities. So it is difficult for communication to know what is the nature of communication, and I think that communication, yes, could be linked to other data to make sense. As for example, I saw, because the book I am preparing on cities and network, we have a lot of studies inside cities, and sociologists, they use telecommunication, but they mix it with many social network approach, more for communities and so on. So I think that linked with other dimension, it could be done, yes.
Thank you, Jose, and welcome to our group. Dulos has a very interesting question. Dulos, will you comment?
Oh, good morning. I'm just was wondering, well, thank you very much, Celine, for this fantastic presentation, first of all, sorry. I just was wondering how to integrate, for example, more human or feeling behaviors in this analysis of the networks. For example, in the case of COVID and the resilience issue, how we can include, I think that one key parameter is also the fear that has population to the virus. So how to integrate this kind of variable in this analysis and this network
Yeah,
model.
I think that behind all these networks are you are right, they are humans, and I think that we could well it's difficult to make everything because days have only 24 hours, but I think that it could be possible to show, for example, a disruption of a network, and then the consequence on people, or the action of some people and the change of a network. So this could be, I think, possible for some networks, some single networks, and to contextualize some networks in the whole networks, for example. So you start from people, you show which network they could make evolve or have impact on, and how this network is integrated in a whole, let's say, network of networks, you see. So this is the goal we have with my student to make, for example, this, where is it? This research. Here, we did not do it yet, but the last part of his PhD is to go to meet the actors and to see, well, what is their experience, how, so we can come and show them all this information and to ask them, what is your experience? How did you live it? What do you see the how do you see the impact of the regional policies and so on? And what was your own behavior? So the linkages, the linkage with people is there, and you can go bottom up or top down, and both.
Thank you.
This is really superb. My questions about these behavior points are when we start to think about subjective matters, sometimes we are influenced by opinions. Would that be a danger?
Well, there are also many research on the influence of opinions, but you must mobilize more social networks like Facebook and all these digital networks. It's possible to extend for, yes, every direction you want after. It is what and this influence, of course, the vision the people they have, of course. The problem is that well, we have during the COVID there was a very interesting debate, many debates, but the first I saw the debate about what is the role of the knowledge facts in front of opinions, and also the fact that the people, they don't know, sometimes we don't know what, and we can make some decision that is maybe the less bad decision, but we cannot know. And so the opinion is very important, but the role of science to show facts is important, but we saw that And of course, I know, but the people maybe they are not aware of that. But even in science, people they contest different facts according to their sample and so on. So the goal is to have samples that are really significant and that really represent something that is relevant. And it is always difficult. This is why also there is all this issue of comparison of cities and so on. And of course, I understand well the fact that the contextualization is very important, but to compare them, it's important to be very careful and to work a lot. Yes.
Another different question, Celine. I would tend to think that the stronger the connections are, the more resilient each of the more connected city, as you call it, would be. Considering the world, as you've shown there, the continents, I would say that the entire world would be stronger and more resilient if the connections are stronger also between the continents, etc. But nowadays we have the practical example that if one place stops, the entire world suffers because of that. So I also I also tend to think that each of the parts should be, let's say, autonomous, and that cuts the linkage. So would this be a cycle of ups and downs?
I don't think so. I think that, well, what is important, it is not that the city have a strong linkages, it is that city has a high diversity of linkages. So the strengths of the linkages are even, if one city is linked only with one another, it is very, very vulnerable of disruption if the other one fell. But the question is that it is not obvious that, well, there are many global connections, but it is not obvious that there is an increase of the globalization. As I told you, globalization, it is mostly intranational, intracontinental, even intra-urban. 40, you saw it, 40% of all linkages are intra-urban. Of course, the nature of inter-urban is very important, and especially in the value chain. So here it is ownership linkages, but I think that in the trade, we do not have this data. It's impossible now to have this kind of data internationally, but and at this scale, we can have it at the national scale, but not at the city scale. And the problem is, I think that it is the balance between the different scales that could be changed after the COVID and after this, the fact that we realized that we were very, and you see how Chinese cities, well, even in 2010, there were only few cities integrated in Asia in the system, and it increased in 2013, 16, but you see in 19, maybe I can zoom on this image if you want, because but it is this is very, very, very. So here you see all the Chinese cities are there now, and they are really also making a very big national system. So I think that we have to be aware of all these scales. I did not put here, but I have some some comparison of the different scales according to the linkage of the different cities of different countries and continents. And there are very big differences. And I think that the balance between the different scales, it is very, very interesting and very important to see for each context what would be the best balance between the different scales.
Very, very, very interesting, Celine. I feel that we need to have more time dedicated to this analysis and to take the opportunity to engage you in our world, in the world of the clusters, and include that dimension in this analysis. So I am really glad for having had your speech today. Thank you very much, Celine, and we will continue if you wish. Yeah. Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
I want to remember you that tomorrow we will speak about the chemical regions and the S3P industrial partnerships, and thanks to Esteban, we have a very, very interesting session. So you will be welcome. Thank you and see you tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Celine. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.